We are building the calculator project from the YByte Python curriculum available at www.ybyte.in. In the previous video, we created these two labels, the entry and the expression label, and we have used a grid method for this on the tkinter window with a column span of 5. The reason being, we are going to put 5 columns of buttons in this layout now, and that's what we're going to do in this video. Now, this is actually quite simple, but it has to be done a little bit carefully. Now, before starting to write any code, let's just recap what we are going to do. So the buttons are going to be 7, 8, 9 slash sign, which is a divide, then a big C which spans two rows, 4, 5, 6 a multiply, 1, 2, 3 minus 0 which is spanning two columns, and a decimal place plus and equal to spans these two rows. So we are going to follow this template and start putting the buttons. Now the code is actually quite simple. We are taking a simple approach where the code will look a little bit repetitive, but the reason we are doing this is because we want to illustrate the usage of the grid methods very carefully. Of course, you can put this inside a for loop and make it a much more efficient, much more concise code. But we are going to just stick with this. So I just say tk dot say button. And my first button, remember, on the left side is has a text of say 7 on it. So I just say text is 7 FG, which is the foreground color. I call it, let's say, black. So that's the color of the font. And the BG, which is the background color, I just call it, let's say, gray. Now, remember, this is just a definition. There are many other options. You can explore those, but I'm just sticking to the very minimal. This is just a definition here. I need to also define to place this. So I'm going to do that by saying, well, grid row of 2, column of, let's say, 0. Now, why is this? Because remember, my row 0 and row 1 were the two labels, and hence row 2 is the button. Now I'm going to use one more option over here, which is that called sticky. So I call it sticky is equal to tk dot nsew. Now we'll talk about this a little bit later, but for now we are just going to stick with this template and start seeing what happens, because I think that's a good way to learn. Do something, see the impact first, and then try to play around with it. Now, one thing before running any code, I want to highlight that we have done things a little bit differently for this button compared to these labels. Because remember, for the labels, we first completely defined it. Then we said that definition dot grid, and then we told the grid positions. Here we have done it all in same statement. So I just said tk dot button dot grid and whatever we want. Now both are okay. There's a small difference between the two, but for our purposes, both are perfectly fine. Notice, however, that this particular button right now has no name, so to say, but that is perfectly fine. So when I run this code, all I get is one button which is on the left side, and that's because that's what I've told. So now I'm going to take this row and copy this multiple times over so that I can create more buttons. Specifically, I'll create 5 of these. Now, like I said, all of this can be done more efficiently from a for loop, but we'll just stick with this for now. Okay, so I say create for me 7, 8, 9 slash C, but remember these must go onto the right column. So I say 0, 1, 2, 3, and 4. And again, I use that option sticky. We'll see what that means later. But when I run this code, I get a very nicely arranged grid of, let's say, 5 buttons. Remember, my last button, which is a C button, had to actually span 2 rows. So I'm just going to tell this guy, well, row span is equal to 2. However, the interesting bit is that when I run this code right now with nothing else changed, in fact, it appears exactly as it was appearing earlier, because there is no second row right now. I mean, there's no, let's say, lower row beyond this. We can do that now. I'm just going to take this whole code and copy this again, paste it again here. So this time around, it's going to be, say, 4, 5, say 6, and a multiplication sign. Now I'm going to have only 4 elements on this row. This row is going to be row number, say, for example, 3. So I make it all, say, 3. And the columns are going to be 0, 1, 2, 3. That's all right. The reason there is no 5th column on the row 2, it's because, remember, the row span for the C button is actually 2. So it's going to occupy this whole thing. Now when I run this, and this is why it's so powerful, so interesting. When I run this, I see a nicely laid out first 2 rows done. Now pretty much same thing is what I have to repeat for the other 2 rows. So I'm just going to take this piece of code from earlier and copy this whole thing over. So when I do this, obviously the labels have to be changed. So it's not 789, it's going to be 1, say 2, 3, say minus sign and then an equal to sign, which is going to span two columns. Now again, this row must be changed. So I'm going to make it 4, 4, 4, 4, 4. Everything else remains exactly the same. Let's run this again. Good idea always to first run it to make sure everything is okay. Indeed, looks fine. I can create the fourth row right now, or let's say the fourth row of buttons, which is overall, a different row. So I say this, well, let's create this. Now this time round, the first label is going to be, say 0. Next, I have a decimal place. Next, I have a plus. But remember, my 0 is going to span two columns. So I'm just going to say column span equals to 2. Now, since 0 is spanning two columns, my 0, 0 and 0, 1 is kind of taken up. I make it column of 2. And this I make as column of, let's say, 3. Now, why don't I have column 4 on this row? Well, that's because remember the equal to button is going to sit there. So I have only 3 buttons on this. Of course, I must make this as row number 5. And this is actually pretty much all I need to do. I run this code and I get these buttons coming out exactly as I had wanted them to. Remember, I wanted 0 to be bigger. I wanted C to be, let's say, a little bit, um, uh, I wanted C to be bigger. I wanted equal to be bigger. Exactly what I wanted. And so, let's say, kind of logical. That's what's going on. Now, clearly you can see that this code can be optimized. We can put this stuff in a for loop. Of course, we have to put this a little bit carefully because we have to compute the column and the row indices quite carefully as the labels are given. I'm going to, however, leave that as an exercise for you, but I hope you found this interesting. In general, if you think this way of learning works for you, look at our website because we have many, many, many such activities. Take care. Thank you so much. Bye-bye.